Hi, this is Kevin for Pixavert.com. In this video I want to look at some of the 3D capabilities in Photoshop CS6. So we're going to be creating an image which looks very much like the image you're looking at now, and I'm going to start the demonstration straight away. Okay, to start off with I'm going to enter some text. In the top center there's a 3D button. Clicking on that turns the layer into a 3D layer. In the bottom left there's a device for controlling the camera that allows me to see the scene from different angles. Inside of the 3D scene itself, it's possible to control the camera using the control cursor. And in the top left there is another panel that allows me to see the same scene but from a different angle. I can expand this and I can choose different directions from which to view the scene. If I click on the button there, it's possible to swap the positions of the panels. Now, even at this stage, it's possible to edit the 3D text. If I go down here and click on the Pixavert object, I get this properties dialog, and that allows me to edit source. Okay, I'm going to edit the text and make it capitals. Notice that this is actually a separate file. It's embedded within the other file. I'm going to accept the changes, close the file, save it, and you'll see the other text here, update. I'm going to make a few further small readjustments, and one thing you might notice is that on the right hand side there are the two panels, one for properties and the other one for 3D, the one in the bottom. And if you look in the top right, you'll see that I've got the 3D built-in workspace open, which is something I think I can recommend when you're working with 3D objects. The standard layers panel is still important. You can use that with 3D objects. But now I'm going to work in the properties dialog. Here there's a cap button. I'm going to click on that, and that allows us to edit some very important settings, including the bevel. In the bevel settings there are width, contour and angle. In this case I think changing width and contour should be enough to give me the look I want. Clicking on the mesh button allows me to change the color of the text. Now when I changed the text from small to large caps, the text actually started floating above the ground plane. I'm going to go to the 3D menu and choose Snap Object to Ground Plane. Now time to add some materials to our surfaces. We're going to start off with the front inflation, and this needs some kind of metallic texture. I think all these actually are going to get a metallic texture. Next, even though the front bevel is tiny, it needs to match the rest of the design, so I'm going to choose another metallic texture for that. Now I'm actually going to choose the extrusion, and we're going to choose a nice coppery metal for that one. The extrusion is a very important part of this particular design. I'm actually going to go into the main properties, and I'm going to extend the extrusion so that the object extends a bit longer into Z space. Okay, back to the extrusion. We're going to edit the properties of the material, increasing the reflection, changing the shine. I definitely want to reduce the bump on this particular material. Okay, I've tweaked all those materials and I just want to do a test render. So I'm going to choose the marquee tool and we're going to select an area to render. The render button is in the properties dialog right at the bottom, and I'm just going to click on that. And we're just going to render the selected area. As you can see there, we're getting a nice decent reflection in that extruded area. It's looking nice and golden. Now you might have noticed in the render that we had a very hard shadow and we didn't have a really good looking bevel. I've gone in and edited the bevel. I'm now going to edit the light. So we're going to choose the infinite light, and what I want to do is to soften the shadows. One thing I like about CS6 is that when you soften shadows you can see immediately inside the display that you're softening the shadows there, and that's some nice feedback there. I want to add a new light to the scene, so I'm going to go down to the 3D panel. I'm going to choose New Spotlight. By pure luck, it's perfectly positioned to add a nice shine to the front of the letters there. I'm also going to soften the shadow, and I also want to work on the color. But first of all, I'm going to increase the intensity of that spotlight. And I'm going to change the color to something maybe a bit more golden. It's a very small adjustment, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference. And next I think we're going to do a test render. That looks okay, it's coming out nice. Okay, a quick detour to the timeline. I'm going to hit the Create Video Timeline button. That gives us a timeline with 3 layers, the 2 3D objects and the background layer. If I twirl open the object that we're working on, you can see we've got tons of options that we can keyframe. The lights, materials and meshes within this particular scene can all be keyframed, so it's very, very flexible. And possibly this is the best use for Photoshop's video capabilities. And when you're done, there's an arrow-shaped button at the bottom of the screen. Use that to render the video. Now, we won't actually be rendering any video in this demonstration. After all, we need to complete the design of the 3D object. I'm going to go to the front inflation again, and I'm going to go to the diffuse attribute and choose load texture. Okay, now the texture has appeared. I'm going to edit the texture, and you'll probably notice straight away that it's exactly the same texture as I'm using in the main design, just upside down. I'm going to add a levels adjustment to darken it up, and then save it and go back to the main document. You can see that it's updated. We can see that texture there now. Right, if I do a test render, you'll see that it looks fine, but it doesn't look like that sort of brushed metal texture that we had right at the beginning. So I want to do a few more edits to the material to give it a slightly different appearance. Right, I'm going to go back to the properties and click on the box next to diffuse and choose edit UV properties. And this brings up a dialog that allows us to test some alterations to the way that our texture displays. And I find changing the U and the V scale most useful. Sometimes when you want to change the offset, you need to do a bit more work with the texture, so I'm going to leave those well alone. As you can see there, we're getting kind of nice looking banding. I hadn't expected that, but we've taken the V scale to 684%. This is just what you get sometimes with this kind of design. You sort of test one thing, you discover something, you think you might like it, and you kind of see whether it works or not. But I'm going to try and actually get the kind of appearance that we had right at the beginning, and I think to get that I need to take both the settings fairly low, and as you can see that we're beginning to get that kind of brushed metal appearance, that brushed aluminium appearance. And this is one of the really cool things about this software. You can kind of see exactly what's going on as you make the adjustments. We're now going to do another test render, and it's more or less beginning to look exactly like what I want. Okay, we're almost done with this design. What I want to do now is to reposition the image so that we can get a kind of a depth of field effect using the camera. I've selected the current view camera in the 3D panel, and I selected the coordinates button in the properties, and within the properties I'm just making a few adjustments to reposition the camera. Okay, back to the main camera properties. In the FOV tab I'm going to change the lens to around 50 millimeters, maybe 60 millimeters, and what I also want to do is to change the distance and depth. Okay, just to save some time, I've started the render. I ended up with a distance of 0.37 and a depth of 1.9. And what that will do is that it will give us a nice blur as the image recedes into the background. Now, the distance and depth taken together give us the focus blur. They allow that sort of tilt shift effect. It's possible to maybe even see it in this image. If you're looking at it in HD on a full monitor, full-size monitor, you may be able to see that the text on the left-hand side is fairly clear right at the front, and the front of the text on the right-hand side is a bit more fuzzy. That fuzziness, that blurriness, or that noisiness is really what Photoshop does to tell you that you're going to get either a soft shadow or you're going to get focus blur. So on the right-hand side, lots of focus blur. On the left-hand side, reasonably sharp. Now I'm going to let this continue rendering, and what I want to do is to look at a couple more things. We're going to look at how to get the reflection, which is very easy to do, and we're also going to look at how to get a more convincing kind of focus blur. Alright, now we've got our image fully rendered, and I've gone down to the environment in the 3D panel and gone to the properties in the top panel. I'm going to change the opacity, and that's what actually introduces the reflection. You can change the color, and also you can change the roughness, and that way you don't get such a neat glossy reflection. I worked on this image previously, and I think it demonstrates both the reflection and the depth of field a little bit better. The reflection in this case is influenced by the fact that the image is sinking under the ground plane. You can really see the depth of field in this image here. You can see the letters kind of fading into the background and becoming really blurred. I actually had to change the backdrop for this image so that it sort of reflected that focus blur a bit better. I did another video about that earlier using the tilt shift blur effect in Photoshop CS6. The layers panel is far more important for this particular 3D object. There's a background layer and there's also a foreground color adjustment layer, which gives it a slightly different color from the lighting that I used actually in the design itself. As you can see there, I've tried to give some kind of feel for the flatness of the ground plane by adding a few drops of water there so that it looks as though it's a surface. I'm actually going to select the 3D layer and I'm going to Control J to make a duplicate copy of it. I've selected both copies. If we go to the 3D menu, we'll see the Merge 3D Layers option, and that's really just how simple it is to merge two 3D objects within Photoshop CS6. You just press that command, it merges them, and you're done. The two objects will now appear in the same scene and have the same lights and so on affecting them. Now, I'm not going to do that in this particular project. The reflection is actually being sort of reflected on the ground plane, and the object, as I said earlier, is cutting through the ground plane. And the way that I did that was basically by rotating the object and moving it down. You can see, if I bring up the Move tool, that will allow us to see just exactly how I've constructed this. You can see there that the part of the object is underneath the ground plane, and that part of the object is not being reflected and is not visible, whilst the rest of the object is being reflected as you would expect. I've got to say that I really do like the reflection. I think it's very easy to set up, and with a bit of tweaking it looks actually very good. I felt that the depth of field was a bit more difficult to gauge, difficult to know exactly what the settings should have been. I was actually going for a much shallower depth of field, but all in all I found the Photoshop CS6 a lot more user-friendly, a lot more responsive, and definitely a lot faster as well. So I hope you found that video useful. That's going to be it for now. Thanks for watching. Till next time, take care. Bye.